If you're paying a mortgage, are you working to own your home or service a bank's profit margins? According to data from the Federal Reserve, the average American household now carries over $104,000 in total debt. A $400,000 mortgage is projected to pay $550,000 in interest alone. $500,000 in interest just to keep us tethered to debt. On a standard 30-year mortgage at 7%, the total interest paid can actually exceed the original price of the home itself. This means we are effectively buying the house for ourselves once and then buying it for the bank a second time. Today on Escape the Clock, we are joined by a former educator with a master's in education leadership who views debt as a technical bottleneck. He's developed a system he calls the financial GPS to help families eliminate all debt, including mortgages, in as little as 5 to 7 years without increasing their income. He personally utilized this framework to cancel 15 years of interest payments and keep $150,000 that would have otherwise been lost to a lender. We're going to break down the amortization hack and the automated math required to engineer a faster exit from the debt cycle. Stay tuned to learn how to stop funding the bank's future and start securing your own. Welcome back to Escape the Clock, the show where we explore financial freedom strategies to help you personalize your plan to a work optional life. I'm your host, Daniel C. Rogers. There is a quiet, persistent drain on our financial systems that most of us have been trained to ignore. We treat our monthly bills as static facts of life, but in reality, many of those payments are leaks in our primary fuel tank. According to the 2024 Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, the median debt-to-income ratio for American families remains a significant hurdle to long-term independence. For many of us, nearly 1/3 of our monthly take-home pay is diverted away from our savings and straight into the hand of creditors. This isn't just a financial burden, it's a time burden. When our income is pre-allocated to past purchases and 30-year amortization schedules, we lose the ability to make decisions about our future. And when we're tethered to high-interest debt, every move feels restricted. We stay in jobs we've outgrown, we delay starting businesses, and we might push our escape date further into the horizon, all to service a system that profits from our lack of a better roadmap. Today's guest understood that technical bottleneck. Andy Bennetts is the founder of Empower Wealth Solutions. As a former educator with a master's in education leadership, he's realized that the legacy system of debt isn't just a lifestyle issue, it's a mathematical inefficiency. After years in the education system, Andy turned his focus toward the financial principles that we were never taught in school. He personally used a framework that he called the financial GPS to cut 15 years off his own mortgage and save $150,000 in interest payments. He didn't just do this by finding a new high-paying job or living on rice and beans. He did it by auditing the math, optimizing his cash flow, and using technology to automate his exit from the bank's schedule. Andy Bennetts, welcome to Escape the Clock.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it. It's a great introduction. I'm excited for our conversation. Lots of different things we can dive into, so I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. So happy to have you here. I was hoping that we could start by breaking down the mechanics of this GPS. I was really interested when you were talking about that. Can you take us back to a moment when you realized that your 30-year mortgage was a variable that you couldn't control, and also the catalyst that shifted you from being a consumer of that debt to the strategist that you've become for your own freedom?
Right. Yeah, no, I vividly remember the moment when I found out how much I was actually paying in interest, and it was like an absolute gut punch. It's kind of like I don't like to inflict pain, but it's one of those things you can't tame what you cannot name. So part of my journey now is helping people have that same gut punch moment, but then showing them the light at the end of the tunnel, that it doesn't have to be that way. And if you can do things in a mathematical fashion, you can pay this off far faster than you ever thought possible. And I would say one of the first questions that people have is, well, why didn't I hear about this? Why isn't the bank letting us know this? Well, banks' best profit is interest, right? So the longer that they have your money in their pockets, the more money they're going to make off of your investment at this point. So it does not behoove them to give this type of information. So it is a little bit of kind of a Robin Hood, stealing from the rich to give back to the poor. But I vividly remember that moment, and just like I said, it was an unfortunate reality of like, okay, well, that's not great. And if it had stopped there, I think it would have, we wouldn't be talking right now. But the fact that there was like, okay, here is a system that looks at the math, not the emotion, not the, you mentioned the rice and beans, right? I mean, we know what that is a kind of an allusion to. No one wants to live on rice and beans until they're out of debt. Like that's kind of a miserable way to live. I've heard different stats of the success rate of that, right? I mean, we don't want to live on just menial ways of living for the next 30 years. Like you never know what tomorrow is going to bring. So why would I want to live in that place of just poverty when we're just trying to dig out? So anyways, long story short, I was very excited to see that there was a faster way to do this, and it was math related, did not require a bunch more income. It just required using the money that was left over at the end of the month and using it in a very mathematical, specific way to pay that down much, much faster.
We're really excited because systems is what we use in a program to make sure that we actually have a path and we can be successful. And that's kind of what I've been teaching and helping people with. So excited to get into that. And you're right, the banks don't have a lot of incentive to help teach people this themselves, right?
Right.
Bankrate had published some of the numbers on this, and they looked at a standard 30-year mortgage at 7%, and the total interest paid on the life of that loan was approximately 154% of the original principal amount. You're basically paying for the home again in interest if you just go with the schedule that's handed to you. Yet so many of us just do that. We just look at our monthly mortgage statement and we think we're seeing progress.
Correct.
But the math tells a different story. It's not actual progress.
Right.
And so it's easy to treat a mortgage like a car loan or a credit card, but it's not the same thing. So can you go a little bit into the fundamental difference and how the interest is being calculated on this mortgage that's making it so much harder for people to escape?
Yeah, absolutely. And you are exactly correct. The way that interest is calculated is not the same. Not all interest is created equal. And in fact, one of the things that we say often on our calls is rate doesn't matter. And that's a pretty bold statement to say rate does not matter. It's not that it doesn't affect how much you end up paying. However, the interest calculated on a mortgage is done monthly, right? Whereas the interest on a credit card is done daily. So you can actually leverage some credit card debt to be able to pay things down and different loans and that kind of stuff. You can actually use loans to pay off your mortgage to get things down faster, because the timing, I think that's another thing that people are just very unaware of. The timing in which you pay your mortgage and the amount that you pay is also very important. I'm somewhat new to this, so I guess it shouldn't surprise me, but there's a lot of well-meaning people that are doubling their payments, right? They're saying, hey, if I throw another extra payment in that does pay things down. And it's not that it's not paying it down. However, it's not like the bank is just, as soon as they get that money, they're rapidly applying that to your principal and it's paying that down, right? It sits in escrow until it builds up to the point where that's enough to actually make another payment. So there's just a lot of misnomers and misguided theories and just thoughts out there that people are not making as much headway as they think that they are. It's really kind of like running on a treadmill. That's really what a mortgage is, unless you can kind of not game the system, but understand the math behind it and be able to get in front of that, figure out when the exact day is, exactly how much to start paying those things down. That's when you start getting ahead. I think that's honestly the reason that I'm so passionate about this financial GPS, is because I'm not sure about you, Daniel, but I've got a million other things going on in my life. For me to kind of factor that math and run the spreadsheets and do all that kind of stuff, that's far more time than I want to spend doing that kind of stuff. So to lean on a system that has been around for 20 years, helped people pay off $2.8 billion in interest, that seems like that's a pretty proven system. I would much rather lean on that and lean into the technology aspect, where that kind of frees me up to go about my day and just follow a GPS just like I would in my car. So that's kind of why I'm so passionate about it.
Yeah, I want to touch on that because I would love to understand how that's different than an overpayment schedule, which is I think what a lot of us think of when we think of getting rid of a mortgage. Is like you just said, you just do an extra payment on top of your normal payment. Right. Also, there's refinancing, which might be another strategy. I want to maybe take a step back first, just so the listeners have the full context of amortization and the differences that might be from a normal loan. So just to do my version of explaining that, when you get your mortgage, you might be very excited because you finally have access to that home you've been dreaming of. And sure, a lot of it, I think people focus on is the rate, right? Like what's a percentage of interest I might be paying? And let's just use fixed interest to make it simple. Mm-hmm. What you're doing though is every one of those payments you're doing, it's not all going into the home. Some percentage of it is paying the bank. Some of it's going to be fees. You might have mortgage insurance that you're paying if you didn't have enough of a down payment. And the interesting about that is because a percentage of the payment is going towards interest and a percentage is going into the principal of the home or actual ownership of the home,
right,
you would think, okay, my payments are helping me make progress, but there's a curve. And they stack the interest up front.
Correct.
So if you only lived in that home for 10 years, you're not really owning the home at all. You're just really renting it in a way because you're just giving interest and interest and interest. And it can take a long time.
Absolutely.
Until you're starting to put actual principal into the home. So I'd love to go a little bit into a 30-year timeline with you for a moment and to understand more about why the banks are doing it this way and how that's minimizing the borrower's equity growth in particular, and then how your GPS is helping.
Right. To answer the first question, why? I guess the simple answer is because they can. and two, they've convinced us that that's the best way. I mean, I don't mean to sound cliche or snarky or whatever, but like we have been sold on the idea that we own our house the second that we signed on the dotted line to have that mortgage. And you're exactly right. You are merely renting your home from the bank until such time that you get that deed back from them. You are literally just renting it from them. And to your point, here's a question for you. On a 30-year mortgage, at what year would you guess that you are paying more towards your principal than you are your interest? What's your guess?
I would hope it's 12 years, but I'm going to guess it's even later than that.
It is quite a bit later than that, which again, and this is one of those things that kind of like, again, that analogy of we have to kind of gut punch to wake people up of like the reality. The reality is it's 21 years. You're 21 years into your mortgage before you are actually paying more on principal than you are interest.
Ouch.
So you are exactly right. It is so front loaded. You are paying far more in interest for the first 21 years of your 30-year mortgage than you are towards your principal. So you're exactly right. You feel like you're making your payments religiously. You're not behind. You're doing what you're supposed to do, quote unquote. But that is helping the bank first. And then if you can stay that long and not refinance or not move, then by the end of the 30 years, sure, you can have your home, but you're exactly right. The numbers that I generally run are a $400,000 loan at 6%. And what they call it is the TIP. If you have to really look really hard in your banking disclosure statement, it's called the TIP. I think that's a little bit ironic, but whatever, we'll get off of that. It's the total interest percentage. It's not the rate. The APR, it actually even says in the fine print, this is not your interest rate. The total interest percentage is what you're paying. And on that use case of $400,000 at 6%, for 30 years, it's 115%. So you're paying $430,000 in interest. And interest is merely bank profit. That's all it is. You are paying to give them the marble floors, the beautiful buildings, all of the stuff to rent their money. And that's not 6%. In no world is 115% 6%.
Wow. Yeah. Consumer debt in the United States has reached a record high of, I think it's 17.8 trillion, probably even higher. And mortgage balances remain to be the largest component in all household liability. So this is a very significant issue. So people are living this right now. So you have this framework called the financial GPS, and it's to help people navigate out of debt. And I want to touch on this system a bit. So I know a lot of people, they'll try to solve this with like a spreadsheet or do a snowball.
Correct.
Where they'll pay down maybe lower interest, build some momentum. But a lot of these things can be a very reactive strategy. So technically, how does a dynamic automated system change the way we interact with our debt on a daily basis?
Right. So I wrote this down because I knew you'd ask this question. I want to make sure that I frame this up just right. So, you are correct. I do use a dynamic financial system, and you use the word audit. I think that's perfect. It's constantly auditing where the cash is. And it talks about something I'm sure we're going to get into a little bit later. Banks don't let money sit idly. That is not what they do. It's the second that you loan your money to them, they are already loaning it to somebody else so they can earn income. Okay. That is their most profitable product is interest, right? So what this financial GPS does is it finds that cash that you don't need in that moment because it knows all of the things. When you pay it, how much you're paying, what's the interest rate, how is it factored, all of those things that's put into the system. And it stages that in a place where it actually can gain interest for you. Okay. So the idea is this financial GPS has two goals, and it does them with mathematical precision. And it is to gain as much interest as you can and eliminate as much interest as possible. It's not a magic wand. We're not selling magic here. It's just math. So we're going to stage that in a place where I can actually gain interest and then come back to the point where we're paying our bills. But in the meantime, we've actually gained a little bit in interest. And there's a number of different ways you can do that. You can do that in a HELOC or a BLOC. A high yield savings account works great. So nothing is new is added. I want to make sure that that's very clear. This is not something that you need to go out and find another income opportunity where you have $2,000 extra in a month to be able to do this. The scenario that you ran of my personal use case of taking our 30-year mortgage down to 15 years and saving $150,000, that was on our own income. Okay. Are we cash flow positive? Yes, we are. Obviously, the more cash flow you have, the faster that can be paid down. However, I just want to make sure that your listeners understand this is not because, I'm selling you on some side gig that you're having to make $2,000 extra in money. It's going to find the spare change. Again, the more spare change you have, the faster that's going to go down. But it's mathematical consistency, specificity. We're not relying on human emotions. A lot of times when I run analyses for folks, they see, oh, I've only got $115 left over at the end of the month. That generally in our minds, in our human minds, that rounds down to zero. Like, what can I do with $115? Well, if you're using math, you can do a lot, right? If you're applying those to the exact right accounts in the exact right time, you can start paying those down in a dramatic fashion. So you mentioned Snowball. Obviously, all of those are incorporated into that Snowball avalanche, the different banking principles. Again, our presentations generally are about the idea of like, how do we take banking principles that they're using to make money and flip that into a matter that actually starts benefiting us.
Yeah, a lot of what I teach is the decision making around cash flow, because so much of life is we have an income. Most of us have a single job, and that money coming in, there's 1,000 decisions we have to make. Some of them are not negotiable decisions. We have to pay those utility bills. We have to buy the food, things like that. But then there's some other maybe compromisable decisions that we might make, but some money hopefully left over at the end of the day. And then we have to decide what to do with that. So it sounds like the GPS is pointing you in the right direction mathematically about what to do with your cash flow decision making so that you can cancel out some of the interest that's drowning you in your mortgage. Is that a good way to say it?
That's a very good way to say it. And the other thing that I absolutely love about it, and again, we lean into this idea of a GPS just because that's something we're all used to, right? And I've even got a video that talks about, we used to travel across the country. Like when I was a kid, I remember we'd have to like figure out where we're on the map. And the second that you take a wrong turn, it's like, oh crap, I got to get back on track, right? It doesn't take into account construction or weather or traffic, right? None of those things are taken into effect. So could you operate your finances in the same way that you would your old map? You could, but why would we choose to operate things in a very old, antiquated model that's not dynamic, where we've got this opportunity to put our, not account numbers, just want to be very clear on this, just our balances, the interest, this kind of stuff, just the information that it needs to know to say, hey, here's where you're at, you're $400,000 in debt. Your destination is you want to be out of debt. I'm going to give you, minute by minute, penny by penny, the fastest route to get to that point, taking into account everything, how it's factored, when you have to pay it, all this kind of stuff. When there is a new income coming in, fantastic. Now we're going to reroute you to a little bit faster route. Opposite, right? The car breaks down. Okay, no worries. Hey, we're going to take this little detour. We'll still get you there. It might take another couple months, but we're still going to get you there the fastest way possible. I absolutely love that.
I was going to ask you next about how does it handle all those curveballs that life constantly hits us with, like medical bills and car repairs and all those things. But it sounds like that's the dynamic nature of it. Things pop up. It's a day by day, minute by minute thing. The compass is going to point you in the right direction.
Yep.
To continue to optimize mathematically wherever you go. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And the other thing that I like to just kind of double down on, just to, as people are trying to envision what this actually looks like, we're driving down the highway. Your GPS at no point, unless you got a different car than I do, Daniel, does not reach over, grab your wheel, and turn you off the road. I mean, is that how yours works?
Mine drives itself, but I could get into that.
Oh, well, see, you're too fancy for my guy. My GPS does not steer the wheel, right? My GPS just tells me, hey, in the next 500 feet, you need to take this right, okay? So if and when you miss that turn, it doesn't pull you off the road. It just says, hey, a mile down the road, you're going to take a right. That added a little bit of time, but you know what? No worries. So it's just very important, because I think when you're talking about people's money, rightfully so, they get very protective, right? I don't want people moving my money. I don't want people having a control over my accounts. Absolutely none of that. We're just going to give you the best guidance with the information that you've given us to get you to your destination as quickly as possible. And when, not if, but when life happens, we will redirect you and be dynamic in that situation.
I know this is a serious topic for folks, because Americans are currently paying over $600 billion in interest annually. And that's on non-mortgage debt. Include mortgage, the number is just mind-blowing. The amount of money going into interest payments every year, something has to be done here. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation. I was hoping we could get a little deeper, though, on how this is helping fight the bank a bit more, because one of the disruptive parts of this approach is how the existing cash flow is going to cancel the interest without you having to increase your income.
Correct.
And I think people's ears should perk up at that. Like, I don't have to go get another job to actually improve my situation. I can just use math to do something smarter. That's great.
Yep.
Just give me the equation or run the math for me. That's fantastic. Can you explain the technical concept of interest arbitrage a bit and how that's helping people?
Right. So in its simplest term, interest arbitrage is basically making a profit by borrowing money at a lower interest rate, right? And then we're either lending or investing that money. The idea is like, how can I use the difference between interest rates, again, to benefit myself? And I think it really comes back to the idea of, are we leveraging our money in the smartest way possible? Okay. And honestly, one of the first conversations I have with everybody, regardless of whether they come on with this GPS system or we're just giving them some good financial literacy aspects of things, the number one thing that I offer, so here you go, here's a freebie. If you do not have a high yield savings account, run to the internet, right? It's probably not at a bank. I'll just be honest with you. Run to the internet and find a good, trustworthy, high yield savings account, because
100%.
When you park your money in a normal savings account at your local bank, 0.25, 0.1, it's so stupid, right? You are not even keeping up with the inflation rate if you are parking your money in a regular savings account. So that's a really easy one to do that says, hey, I can earn 4% just for having my money sit there. Yes, you sure can. And then we're going to tell you when to pull it out and apply it strategically to this credit card, to this student loan, to pay off as much interest as possible.
I actually love that you said that, because, you're clearly the interest guru, and it's important that people understand this is a numbers game.
Correct.
When you're borrowing at such high premiums, which honestly I think should be criminal to be allowed to charge 20 plus interest.
Yeah, I agree.
To a premium of someone who has not had a chance to create income for themselves yet. Mm-hmm. Regardless, your savings rates, again, maybe criminal, you can't get over 1% interest returned to you on the money you can slave away to put away. But high interest savings accounts, they do return, and usually above inflation. So you're actually getting a return. You might actually get ahead. So I want to ask you, that makes sense. Get the higher interest rates, combat the lower interest rates. But one thing I think people typically miss is volume. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is I'll talk to someone and they'll be really proud of all their low interest rates. I only got 7% here. I got a 15% there. Yet the total volume of what they're borrowing is substantial.
Correct.
Yes, the rates are low, but their leverage is higher than their assets. Can you talk a little bit about how that's part of the calculation?
Absolutely. And a little bit of a side note here, but I think it does relate right here is the idea of, and I'm sure you've read, Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I think so much of this starts with your mindset. There, again, we have been taught, I'm sure we're going to have the education conversation here in a little bit, but we have been conditioned to think that a house is an asset and nothing but. I really would challenge that theory that your house is only an asset. Your house is an asset if you choose to sell it. If you are just sitting on it, it's not really an asset, right? Because you are paying money into it. You're not getting any money out of it. So there's that whole thing. And the reason I bring that up right there is when I'm having conversations with people, you're speaking of volume, right? There's no higher volume of debt that you can have, generally speaking, than your house. But people do not think house equals debt equals, right? They're thinking, oh, that's an asset. I'm investing in it. But do you really want to ever leave or sell your dream home? Most people don't, right? I mean, that ends up happening, sometimes down the road. But if you are buying your house thinking it's an investment, understand that you're going to have to turn around and move in a few years when that ends up happening. So I bring that up just to say that we need to be realistic. Again, that's why I love the financial GPS aspect of this, because we're not sugarcoating it, right? Math is math. You may not like the math, but math is math. And whether you want to admit it or not, your house is by far the largest debt payment that you are making every single month. I don't care whether you have a 2% interest rate or you have an 8% interest rate. It is by far the most amount of interest volume-wise that you are paying into. So to turn a blind eye or to put your head in the sand and just pretend that's not a reality, you're just doing yourself and your future a disservice by not taking a very strategic approach to paying that down as quickly as possible, to then start freeing things up to actually pay, to use your money for things that you want, not just to make the bank that much more wealthy.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. It can be a massive liability. We just recently had an expert coming on talking about tracking and how net worth gives you a bigger picture. And once you start seeing liabilities like the amount of borrowing you're doing on your home, can be really humbling.
Absolutely.
So I'm really glad we're having this conversation. I do want to switch gears for a second, though, if that's okay.
Yeah.
You're a former educator with a master's in education leadership, and I want to talk a little bit about why we lack the basic education in the system that we need to be able to work in a system like this. And there's 25% of U.S. high school students currently have access to standalone personal finance courses. That means 25%. I bet you I could wager that's probably the more well-to-do high school students
Correct.
in certain areas of the country. That leaves a majority of young people who then become adults to learn debt management through trial and error. And that has been shown to be very, very costly. One, what do you think about this situation, why it's absent from the standard curriculum, and what can we do about it besides having conversations like this?
Man, that's a tough question as to why it's not there. I am a former educator. My heart is in schools, is for teachers, for students, that kind of stuff. So I preface it to just say my heart is still there. However, I have lived through that and seen kind of the shadow side. I won't say the dark side, but the shadow side of education being very much driven by politics and different things like this and testing companies. I very much question some of the decisions that are made at either a state or a national level. Is this really what's best for kids, or is this best to just continue the engine that is education? That sounds pretty negative, but I think that we just have to have that realization that I think some of the decisions being made are not in the best interest for kids. It's just like, hey, we've always done it this way, or, the special interest, this or that. Anyways, we won't get into that. I can't affect change on that. I always talk, whether I'm working with my own personal folks or just my family even, is, it's good to identify, hey, this is a thing that's maybe not fair. Can we do anything about that? Maybe, but how much time do we want to dedicate towards things that we have no control over? So being that what it is, I would say, what can we do about that situation? I would say, it all starts with education. And if it's not going to be done in the schools, how can we do this as community members or churches or whatever the case is? How can we give? And it's not just students, but I mean, to your point, right? If you don't learn it as a student, then you're doing it as an adult. And then we just perpetuate this idea of this living on credit as a society. And I've got quite a few folks that I work with internationally. This is not a worldwide issue. This is an American. Other countries do not see debt as a way of life. It is something that they steer clear of, which we did, 50, 100 years ago. But we have just quickly gone from like seeing debt as an absolute last case scenario into like, oh, I've got to buy my couch. I got to swipe a card to do that. So anyways, I'm kind of off tangent at this point. I just think that it's not taught because it doesn't align with what matters in education and the government at this point. One of my favorites is Sir Ken Robinson. If you never have looked him up, look up Sir Ken Robinson. He's got an amazing TED Talk that just talks about how our education system is based on the Industrial Revolution. And it's the same thing, right? Kids come in, you get taught the same thing at the same time, and it's just like a factory, right? We're just pumping kids out with the same basic information. It's not thinking like an entrepreneur. It's not thinking like a business owner, thinking about what is the best way to spend this money, not just earn and keep the system going, but how do I leverage this and how do I invest and how do I do this in a smart way? It breaks my heart that is not what is taught in our schools, but it's not. So, I'm trying to do my little part to kind of give back a little bit on that.
Yeah, and a little education goes a long way. There's this thing called the generational debt loop, which is sadly, you grow up with a consumer identity and you learn this is a way of life. You're more likely, not guaranteed, but you're more likely to teach it to your children. And it creates this idea of a capitalist identity, and then debt continues as a way of life. 25% of Americans say that debt is the primary reason they have not yet retired or feel they cannot retire. So
right.
This is something that has to be dealt with. And look, if this is helpful and you're learning about debt and the seriousness of it, share it.
Please.
Listen to it, share it. Like, the idea is this is free education. This is what we're trying to do to combat that. This is not taught in schools. Mm-hmm. Help somebody. If you think that they're suffering from this, most likely most people are. Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about freedom, because this is about financial freedom. This is about being able to know your number, have enough wealth so you have the option to not have to work until 65, have the choice. So you were able to personally cut 15 years off your mortgage. Mm-hmm. You saved $150,000 in interest. That's a really great amount of savings. And I look at that as not just a financial win. That was like reclaiming your life.
Absolutely.
That was getting time back.
Yes.
So how did that win change the way you look at your life and at work and at freedom in general?
You're exactly right. It is so much bigger than just numbers. It's so much bigger than just money in a bank. It is about, okay, where am I going to be in 15 years? And for what it's worth, since then, because of some other more complex aspects of this, incorporating some wealth strategies into that, we've taken the 15 years down to 10. So we continue to make that shorter and shorter. I often relate it back to the idea, again, of the financial GPS and me as a competitive dude. When I'm going across the state and it says 8 hours, I'm like, whatever, I'm going to make it in 7.5, right? So it's kind of one of those things, having that immediate feedback of like, okay, if I make this decision right now, what does that do to my guaranteed debt payoff day? If that's going to drop it by 2 months, it's worth maybe one less trip to Starbucks or whatever the case is, right? I use that as just a common one. So I think part of that is just the insight and the forecasting of like, what does the decisions I do right now, how does that affect the future? So that's going to help me to kind of cut things down. I'm sorry, I got off track. What was your question? I wanted to throw that out there, but that's not exactly the question you asked.
I was asking just kind of how your life had changed once you were to get through that milestone, because I do know that this is something you have to take on and it can shift and create momentum for you.
Absolutely. We as kids, we start with big dreams, like this huge circle of like all of the things that you're going to do in life, right? And then you go to college and your circle gets considerably smaller because of how expensive it is and then you buy your first home and it gets a little bit smaller. And then you have to get that job that you didn't really like, but you have to pay the bills and it gets a little bit smaller. And before you know it, you're 25 years into your life, and these big dreams that you knew were possible and that you were so excited about, you are now a speck of what you wanted to be and what you envisioned your life to be. And the thing that I love about the clarity and the future, being able to see into the future, it's kind of like your crystal ball, is that we get to expand people's dreams again, right? Rather than shrinking them back down to just living this life of mediocrity, we can, through math, right? Not through magic, through math, be able to expand lives and say, hey, what would it mean if you could have that paid off in 10 years? What would it mean if you could project out if you want to go on this European vacation and it's only going to add 3 or 4 months to your debt payoff day? What would that mean for you and your family, right? We're not guaranteed tomorrow. So this idea of waiting to do all of the fun stuff until after you're retired, I do not agree with that in the slightest. I think that we're not guaranteed tomorrow, so we need to, kind of seize the day, make memories with your kids while they're young. And so that is the long drawn out version of what that did for me, is that it allowed me to kind of expand my dreams again.
Well, thank you so much, Andy, for joining us today and helping shine a light on this very serious topic. For listeners who are interested in getting some help here or just learning more about you, how can they connect with you and Empower Wealth Solutions?
Yep, I love that. I appreciate that. So empowerwealth.solutions is the website. That's the easiest way to get connected with me. So empowerwealth.solutions. You can do empowerwealthsolutions@gmail if you'd prefer to email me. But the very top of the website has a get started, and that'll take you right to my calendar, and we'll just schedule what we call an Empower Wealth game plan, right? Everybody's plan's going to look a little bit different. I've got a cousin right now that's coming out of college, so he doesn't have the house debt and all this kind of stuff, but he also wants to make some smart moves, right? So I talk about in one of my in-person workshops is the importance of time in the market, right? It's not timing the market, it's time in the market, right? So if you can invest early on, the difference that's going to make when you're 25 years old, you do that for a few years down the road, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. But if you take a late start, right, then you're kind of trying to play catch up. So everybody's going to be a little bit different. You might have a bunch of debt, you might have a little bit of debt, but wherever you're at, I would love to have a conversation, be honored to have a conversation with you. No judgment whatsoever. It's like, hey, I'm on your team. Whatever information and knowledge I have, I'm happy to share with you. And if it's something that we can do moving forward, that's great. If not, then I will try to give you a lot of resources to kind of use on your journey.
Awesome. Thanks again, Andy. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Our journey starts with debt. We often wonder why so many of us feel stuck running on a financial treadmill that never seems to stop. But when you look at the data, it isn't a mystery. It's a design feature of the system. Only 25% of students in the US receive any form of financial education in school. That means the vast majority of us enter adulthood financially illiterate, creating a perfect environment for a banking system that preys on ignorance. We're taught to be consumers of debt rather than strategists of capital. The result? A generational debt loop. One where we pass on the values that hurt us to our children, further entrenching us into a predatory system. It doesn't matter how smart you are, a beast this big is going to bite you. In my entire lifetime of handling complex projects and engineering problems, I have to admit that even I fell prey here. For years, I treated my mortgage like a static obligation. I was paying what was put in front of me, and I assumed that if I sent the check in on time, that I was winning. I mean, that's exactly how they set it up. You do feel like you're getting ahead by making your payments on time, hoping your credit's going up. But I didn't realize all I was really doing was renting the bank's money at a premium. And the cost of that ignorance isn't just interest, it's opportunity. And as Andy so eloquently put it, rising costs constantly shrink our lives. We start with these massive dreams, and then we get the job, the car, the house, or whatever. And then with every new payment, the circle of what's possible gets smaller. We put off living until retirement, hoping that we'll have enough health left to enjoy it. So what do we do about this? There are plenty of strategies out there. You've likely heard of the debt snowball or the debt avalanche. Those are great for behavioral modification. But if you want to look at the shortest mathematical path to freedom, it does come down to interest arbitrage. It's about moving beyond simple budgeting and using a financial GPS, for instance, to identify the inefficiency in the banking system. By understanding the difference between daily interest and monthly amortization, you can effectively cancel out the borrowing before it compounds against you. By doing this, you don't just pay off a house, you stop shrinking your life. Give yourself a legitimate shot at financial freedom years or even decades ahead of schedule. Interest arbitrage might sound complicated, but it doesn't have to be. Park your savings anywhere that gets a return higher than inflation. Look at your mortgage, see where the money is going. Not just the interest rate, but look at the total interest percentage, the TIP. We're trained to look at APR, the annual percentage rate. We see something like 6% and think that it's manageable, but Andy told us to look at TIP. On a standard loan, that number reveals the terrifying reality. You aren't paying 6%. You're paying 154% of the principal. And so from there, you can get a handle on how to use your cash flow to beat that negative interest by using the positive interest from something like your HYSA, fighting fire with fire. I'd love to hear from you. How are you planning to break the generational debt loop in your own family? Send me an email at contact@escapetheclock.com. I'm Daniel C. Rogers. Thanks for listening, and best of luck engineering your debt exit, escaping the clock. I'll catch you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Remember, while I'm not yet a financial planner, I am getting my degree in wealth management. You should take anything you've heard here as tips and advice to making your plan. To learn more, visit www.escapetheclock.com. There, you can find the book, resources, including the planner, and you can even schedule time with me. Please remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.